Welcome, one and all, to another episode of Pacific414 episode review. I am your host, Mike, and in this afternoon's episode, I'm not going to be talking about one particular episode of a TV show. I'm not going to be talking about two episodes of a TV show. Heck, I'm not even going to be talking about three episodes of a TV show. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be talking about season one of Seth MacFarlane's The Orville. Now, Seth MacFarlane, as you all know, is the creator of Family Guy, The Cleveland Show. You have American Dad, and he's also written and starred in movies like Ted, Ted 2, and A Million Ways to Die in the West. But what some of you may not know, and I'm going to try to bring it up here in just a second, if you'll just bear with me as I do so. One second, folks. Please bear with me as I do this. But what you'll be seeing on this screen shortly when I officially share it, I'm not going to share it right now. So let's go ahead and remove it. But what you may not know, and I'm going to bring up the image I want to bring up here, is that Seth MacFarlane has had a history with a particular science fiction television series, one that's been around for almost 55 years. It'll be 55 years on September 8th of this year. So just bear with me as I go through this. But as you can see in this image right here, this is an image of Seth MacFarlane, Captain Mercer in the Orville on Star Trek Enterprise. I believe it was during its third season. He was one of the engineers on board the Annex 02 Columbia, which was the sister ship to the Enterprise. And to give you a little backstory, it was the character of Charles Trip Tucker III, who was the chief engineer of Enterprise, and then he was pretty much recruited to join the crew of Columbia because Columbia was the newest of the NX class starships to be launched, but it was being delayed. It was actually 6 months delayed. And there was a particular story arc that was going on in Enterprise at that time. It was the Xindi story arc. And at that time, we see Trip over on the Columbia. He's in engineering, and Seth MacFarlane, who I forget the name of his character in that particular episode, but anyways, he's an engineer and he does question Trip on the regulations as far as priming the warp reactor. Well, Trip tells him, "I wrote those rules, so you're gonna do what I'm telling you to do because I have spent a lot of time with this particular warp reactor, same one that we have on Enterprise, so I know how to get this done." So, that's Seth MacFarlane's, on-screen history with Star Trek. But if you're, a Family Guy fan, you've seen it many times where there's been a cutaway gag, and it has something to do with Star Trek, whether it be the original series movies, in particular, The Wrath of Khan, or, The Next Generation. As a matter of fact, he's even had the full cast of Next Generation, including Denise Crosby, on in an episode of Family Guy. So, when I first started to hear, rumblings going on, in the gossip pages, you know, you take everything with a grain of salt. I don't care who it comes from, what gossip column you read it from, or even, YouTubers that you see, you know, reporting the rumors, because a lot of them, I'm going to give them credit, even though some people won't give them credit. A lot of them do say this is a rumor, folks. But when you first start hearing that Seth MacFarlane is interested in doing, his own Star Trek series, and you don't realize at the time that it starts to come about because Seth MacFarlane actually did pitch his own idea for a Star Trek spinoff. And of course, it was denied. And long story short, Brian Fuller and Alex Kurtzman were greenlit to create Star Trek Discovery. So you have Seth MacFarlane, who's got a proven track record as far as animated comedy series are concerned. You know, Ted 2, and of course, A Million Ways to Die in the West. So he's got that track record for him. We've all heard him sing on Family Guy as the voice of Brian, and he even had his own CD that came out. But, what does someone like Seth MacFarlane do when it comes to creating a Star Trek series? And he's denied by those who are in charge, those who can give him green light as far as saying, all right, we'll let you do your Star Trek series. Well, what Seth MacFarlane did, and he wasn't alone in this. He had help from Jon Favreau, and if you're not familiar with who Jon Favreau is one of the people responsible for the first, second, and third stage of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He directed a little movie called Iron Man, a movie I don't think it ever went far. And I'm kidding on that, folks. I'm kidding on that before you start, you know, coming at me in the comment section. I'm full aware of Jon Favreau's, part in the MCU, being a very key factor in the MCU, being one of the driving forces behind The Mandalorian, along with Dave Filoni. Well, Jon Favreau also had a hand in helping to bring about the Orville. And, you can see the touches of, Seth MacFarlane. You can see subtle homages to Star Trek and other science fiction series. And, even in interviews that I've seen, excuse me, interviews that I've seen with, Jon Favreau talking about how creative Seth MacFarlane is, how much he appreciates the sci-fi drama, the sci-fi genre, if that, if you want to say that too. All the tropes that are in, science fiction in general, not just Star Trek, but all of science fiction. And, just the praise that Seth MacFarlane gets for all the detail. And if you don't believe that, I mean, look on YouTube. There's a video of 14-year-old Seth MacFarlane with a few friends, and he recorded and produced his own Star Trek episode, and his William Shatner impression is on point. And if that doesn't tell you how much he loves Star Trek, I don't know what will, other than the continuous references to Star Trek as a whole on Family Guy. And like I said, the little homages that you see on the Orville. And some of those homages, being the fact that they have replicators, they have holodecks, and, even the shuttles, they look like they could have been, with a little tweaking, something that might have come out of a Star Trek series. The music alone in the Orville fits with 90s era Star Trek. And you might feel otherwise, and that's perfectly all fine. But I really have been enjoying watching this series as a fan of Star Trek and a fan of Seth MacFarlane's, and the fact that you have music that's been done by John Denby and Bruce Broughton, or Broughton. I'm forgetting his last name at this moment, but you have those two composers and other composers, and they seem to capture, the Star Trek style of composing music, even little tidbits, you know, of music, little notes here and there that sound like the original series. And then again, like I said, other parts that sound like, the Star Trek series from the 90s. And you can include Next Generation in there. And, speaking of Next Generation, that's really where this series seems to, really hone in on is, the Next Generation. There's even a bonus video on one of the Next Generation Blu-rays where Seth MacFarlane, and I'm going to be paraphrasing here, I'm not going to be quoting it exactly, but Seth MacFarlane says some of the greatest episodes of Next Generation were those episodes where it didn't rely on a big budget, a small budget, and it was talking about, you know, situations that were occurring, trying to bring everything down to what's happening into the real world. You know, if you want to, put it this way, he's talking about current events, you know, episodes that were happening at the time. And you definitely see that in the Orville. Yes, it has the comedy, but it's able to go into, the serious drama when it needs to. But before I continue on with those aspects of the Orville, I want to talk about, you know, Seth MacFarlane being a part of the cast. I want to talk about, you know, the cast in general. Again, some ties some of the cast has to Star Trek and other series. And, let's go ahead. Let's start off with the man himself, Seth MacFarlane as Captain Ed Mercer. And we first meet Ed Mercer when he's the rank of commander. And, when Old Wounds begins, which was the first episode of the Orville, we get a nice computer matte painting of New York City in the 20th century. And he walks in on his wife, basically having some alone time with an alien named Derubio. And Derubio squirts out this blue goo, and we find out later on what that blue goo does, but that essentially causes a divorce between Ed Mercer and his ex-wife by the time we meet her again, Kelly Grayson, who's actually a commander. And I'm going to bring this up, the fact that both Ed Mercer and Kelly Grayson are actually a part of the Planetary Union, which is very much, very, very on point, the United Federation of Planets, that like it is in Star Trek. And I do apologize if I stutter or pause during this review, but I just want to get that out of the way. But we first meet those two characters, and then of course, then this is all in Old Wounds. We meet Admiral Halsey, and he's played by Victor Garber. He's a character actor who has been on several TV shows throughout his career. And he tells Ed, you had so much potential. You should have been a captain by age 40. Should have been in command of your own ship. We have a ship available, which happens to be the Orville, which is a mid-level exploratory vessel, and the exploratory commission vessel ECV 197 is the registry number. And you know, we get a little bit of backstory where there were people in the Admiralty who were rooting for Ed Mercer, and because of Ed going through the divorce, it affected him where he wasn't reported on time and he wasn't given it 100% effort. So Ed's given command of the Orville, and before he even gets command of the Orville, is totally given command. He says he needs a pilot. Well, he has a pilot, and that pilot is played by Scott Grimes, who plays the character of Gordon Malloy, who is the helm officer on board the Orville. And Gordon and Ed have a history. Gordon's familiar with Ed's, relationships of the past. He knows that Ed's divorced from Kelly. He knows everything that happened, and he doesn't exactly have the best reputation himself. But Ed vouches for him before he even meets up with, you know. Excuse me again. But he vouches for him before he meets with Gordon, and you know, Gordon accepts the assignment on the Orville. And of course, they're in the holodeck. They're in a holodeck simulation. I know they call it the simulator on the Orville, but they're in a holodeck simulation, which is very reminiscent of one of Worf's holodeck programs that he would run in Next Generation, and it was even run later on DS9. And of course, those two have a backstory. We get on board the Orville, and that's where we meet the rest of our main cast. We have Commander Bortus, who is played by Peter Maycomb. And if I were to describe, Bortus, well, Bortus is a Moclan, and they're a one gender species who have been known in the past to be born female. But every member of that species is male. And Bortus is pretty much the Worf of the Orville. And he's very serious. He's, very into the Moclan traditions. We have certain traditions that we must follow, and he's very strict about it, except for when it came to about a girl. But I'll get to that. And then in the show we also have Dr. Claire Finn, and she should be very familiar to anyone who's a Star Trek fan, especially those who watch Deep Space Nine in season 3 all the way to season 7, because Claire Finn is played by Penny Johnson-Gerald, who was also Cassidy Yates on Deep Space Nine, and she also had a role on 24, and she's been on several other TV series, but she's the chief medical officer here on the Orville, and she knows her stuff. She's highly skilled and is able to do her job, not just to the best of her ability, but better than anyone else can. So you've got her, and again, that's a Star Trek connection. And, so we've got Kelly, we've got Ed, we've got Gordon, and we've got Dr. Finn. So the next character that we meet is Alara, and she is the chief security officer on board the Orville. She's a species called Layan, Salayans, not the Layans, Salayans. And that species is known for their strength, their brute strength. And it's only amplified in Earth gravity. So, they're a super strong species. A lot of times you'll see, Captain Mercer ask her to open something for him, lift something for him because of her species' strength. And also, she's 23 years young at the start of the series. So, you get a little backstory that most Lanes don't join the military. And, those that do are fast tracked to be on board Starship because, to have someone like a Salean who's been known for their strength, well, you want somebody like that in security as far as the planetary union is concerned. And then the next character that we also meet is John Lamar at the start of the series, and in season one, he's the navigator, and he's a bridge officer. He's very laid back, and we do find out later on in season one just how smart he is, and how he could have already been commander at the point instead of lieutenant, but he decided not to apply himself because it was looked down upon where he grew up. And the next character that we end up meeting is Isaac. He is pretty much the Spock, Data, Seven and Nine, T'Pol, any character that is pretty much the brains of the group and they're devoid of any emotion. That's what Isaac is. And he's a Kalon. They're a species that are all machines. They were created by organic life forms who, you know, put the Kalons into slavery. And I might, be giving some spoilers for season two, but please bear with me. And, you know, they were built by organics and put into slavery. Well, the Kalons rose against their creators, and the Kalons they look down on people like you, people like me. Why? Because we're organic. We're considered inferior. It kind of reminds me of, if for any of you who uh, watched Transformers the movie, the 86 version. I'm not talking about the 2007 Michael Bay version. No, I'm talking about the original animated series, because there is a line, and it's after Starscream and the Decepticons discard the damaged and injured and dying Decepticons out of Astro Train, including Megatron. And Soundwave, says Soundwave superior, Constructicons inferior, when everybody's fighting over the leadership of the Decepticons. Well, let's just look at the Kalons as pretty much Soundwave. Well, let's look at it like that. They feel that they're superior. They're a machine. They feel that organics are weak because they're organic. They only live so long, and they don't really focus on all their brain power. Even the Borg felt that way. Several other alien species feel that way. The Cybermen and Doctor Who, they feel they're superior than, everyone else. The Daleks, of course. But those are your main characters. And of course, I did forget to mention that Isaac's play by Mark Jackson. You got, Alara, who's played by Halston Sage. And of course, I already mentioned Peter Maycomb as Bordas, Scott Grimes as, Gordon, and, Jay Lee as John Lamar. And of course, you had Adrian Palicki, who's Kelly Grayson. And one more time, you've got Seth MacFarlane as Ed Mercer. So, in the Orville, you've got, your Klingons, you've got your Romulans, although the alien race that I feel is, maybe a little Klingon, maybe a little Romulan, but maybe, a little bit of Jem'Hadar is the Krill. I mean, you look at them, they're a lizard, reptilian species, and, they have a god that they view as the Almighty Avis. Yeah, I know Avis, a lot of jokes are even made in the series about, the car company. But you know, they're very much strict as far as their religion is concerned, their beliefs. Avis guides them through everything. You know, eh, just like every religion, there's a Bible of sorts. There's a book of sorts. You have the Bible, the Quran, and a few others spiritual books. They're religious fanatics, some might say, and you could also say that they view themselves as being superior to everyone else because of how seriously they take their religion. So you have the Kalons, who are old enemies of the Planetary Union, and you know you have several different things that happened in the first episode, happened in the second episode. I'm in the first episode, Old Wounds. It's about this device that can rapidly age, organic compound, a banana. It could rapidly age seeds, and Old Wounds in particular, it was a pine seed that they, managed to grow into a full pine tree at the end of the episode. And you get the backstory between the Krill and the Union, and how the Union, being explorers, isn't as heavily armed as the Krill are. So their ships aren't quite up to par when it comes to a Planetary Union ship versus a Krill ship. And you know, I like the fact that they are taking time to you know build up the lore that consists in this universe, because so many times there are series that don't spend enough time when it comes to building their lore. And with this series, you can tell that they're laying the foundation for their lore. They're not going to give us everything all at once. It's not going to all come in the first season. We're going to find out, you know, a little bit here, a little bit there as the seasons go on. And, you know, some of the things I really like about this episode, Old Wounds, is the fact that, it does delve into the past for both Ed and Kelly, and also the Planetary Union. And, it gives us that backstory that we need, the foundation that we need to know that, okay, these two sides, they're not seeing eye to eye, but at some point, perhaps they will agree on something. And of course, I'll say part of that season two. And, you know, when it comes to particular episodes of this series, especially in season one, the episodes I really found myself enjoying, really found myself engaged in, were, let me just do an adjustment here, where the episodes about a girl, and that's an episode, and it's shortly after. I've got the episode written down here. Let's see. Yeah, it was the episode right after Command Performance, and I'll talk about Command Performance real quick. Command Performance is an episode where Kelly and Ed basically become part of this exhibit by the species, who, again, another species that feels that they're superior to the species that they have in their zoo. So in that episode, when Ed and Kelly go over to a ship that they think has Ed's mother and father on it, and it actually turns out to be a ship that doesn't even look like an Earth vessel once it's truly revealed that is part of this species, who basically captures other alien life forms to display as an exhibit in their zoo. Well, in that episode, Alara's left in command, and she doesn't feel like she's capable of being in command. And throughout the episode, she's doubting herself. The crew's doubting her decisions, especially when she decides that she's not going to go rescue Kelly and Ed. And this happens after she's talked to the Admiralty back on Earth, and they tell her we got to just consider them lost. And Alara is feeling the pressure. It's getting to her, and at one point she changes her mind as far as following orders after talking with Claire, and she decides to let the crew know that they're going to go and they're going to rescue Ed and Kelly. So then, what ends up happening, long story short, and if you've never watched any of my reviews before, I always say long story short when I'm trying to remind myself and get to the point. So hopefully I break that habit one of these days. But what ends up happening is the Orville does end up rescuing both Kelly and Ed. And, Alara, prays for her decisions to come and rescue both Kelly and Ed, even though Ed's going to have to answer to the Admiralty, and she's going to have to answer to the Admiralty for her actions. But still, it was a great episode. It told two different stories where if you treat people like animals, do them as lower life forms, then perhaps you need to be shown something else. And what was funny is in that episode, when Isaac and Alara come to the zoo where Kelly and Ed are at, they are able to exchange Ed and Kelly for their freedom. And the way they bargain out of it is reality TV. And you and I both know if there's anything about reality TV, it's not reality based. It's all scripted. But it's entertainment and people watch it. So, what ends up happening in the next episode, which kind of follows up, Command Performance kind of doesn't, and it's the episode about a girl, and the way it follows up Command Performance is during Command Performance, Bortus wasn't able to be in command of the Orville because he was not only laying the egg of his infant child, but he also had to sit on the egg until it hatched. And that ends up happening at the end of Command Performance. So that leads us into About a Girl. And in About a Girl, we, are given the scenario where Clyden, who I haven't mentioned yet, but Clyden, who is Bortus's mate, and Clyden's played by Chad Coleman. And Bortus and Clyden are having a debate of sorts as far as changing the sex of their infant child who was born a girl. Because all Mocklins, if they're born female, are obliged to have a sex change and become a male. So what ends up happening is, Bortus and Clyden do have their disagreement, but they ultimately decide that they need to go back to their home planet of Moklis. And of course, this happens, on board the Orville, and, Bortus goes to see the captain and Kelly, and of course is denied about being given transport to Moklis to have the procedure done. Dr. Finn won't perform this procedure on the infant child either, because there's nothing wrong with the child. And ultimately, Clyden and Bortus go behind the crew's back, and they contact a Moclan vessel, which takes them back to Moklis. They get to Moklis, which is an industrial, you know, weaponized planet. They're testing weapons constantly. You can see the pollution in the atmosphere, even though in some shots it reminded me of Vulcan, which I did mention in last Tuesday's live stream I did with my co-host of Sunday Night Frontiers, TKO. And we're introduced to more of the Moclan culture, and in that episode we come to find out that the Moclan race views the female race as being an inferior member of the species. I shouldn't have said race. The female sex as the inferior sex of the species. And Kelly is appointed arbitrator to try to plead a case as to why Bortus and Clyden's child shouldn't be changed from a female to a male. And the Moclans, they're all about tradition. Well, even after Ed and Gordon go to the mountains and they discover that there's a Moclan female and they bring her back with them, it's still not enough to sway the powers that be in the Moclan judicial system to allow Clyden and Bortus to keep their child female. Their child is, put through the operation and goes from being a female to male. And one of the things, I liked about this episode was in the fact that they went and found the Moclan female. That reminded me of Sins of the Father, which was a third season episode of Next Generation. And it's an episode where Worf goes to the Klingon homeworld, Kronos, and stands trial for the supposed treachery of his father, Moog, which, we come to find out in that episode that it was the Duras family, in this case, Duras himself, who betrayed the Klingon Empire and allowed the Romulans to attack the Klingon outpost, which was, heroically rescued, at least some of them were, by the Enterprise C, before the Enterprise C crew was lost and the ship was lost. Of course, if you've seen yesterday's Enterprise, we know that Tasha Yar was one of the crew members on board the Enterprise C that was taken hostage and held captive. And, that's how we got Sailor. But, I like the fact that it did have, a Sins of the Father type vibe. But I also like the fact, because it's something I really enjoyed about Next Generation, is that it wasn't afraid to talk about current events. It wasn't afraid to talk about subject matters going on throughout that particular point in the decade, or going on throughout society. We have members of the population who are the transgender community, and a lot of them are disrespected because of their beliefs, beliefs in how they feel about themselves. And this episode serves as a reminder that people who feel a certain way should be allowed to live their own lives and shouldn't have someone else make a decision for them. And even Kelly mentions that during the episode, how she wouldn't have liked it if somebody made a decision without asking her about it first and just made the decision anyway. And, you know, I really liked, that fact. And again, the fact that, again, we have people of the transgender community who, strongly feel the way they do. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with anyone having the beliefs that they have. If, they feel like they relate more as one sex or another, or, non-binary, well, it's their life. You gotta let them, you've just gotta let them live it. And, it does touch on that in this episode. It, touches on the fact that people should be able to make their own decisions. And, it also touches up on the fact that, you know, there are societies that do not accept it, will not accept it for one reason or another. And it's very hard for people to accept, differences. And, that's how I looked at it. So, you know, you go throughout this series, especially those first three episodes, and you see the footing that they're trying to establish. And of course, one of my other favorite episodes of this first season was the episode Majority Rule. And, you know, in that episode, Majority Rule, it was John, it was Gordon, it was Kelly, and Dr. Finn, who were sent on an away mission onto this planet. And when they get there, people are wearing these badges, and there's a green up arrow and a red down arrow. And basically, depending on what you do, and instead of going through a court of law, people end up, going up to your badge. And if they like what you've done, if you've done something good, they'll hit it, and they can thumb it up, if you want to say. Or if they don't like what you're doing, if they don't trust you, or you've done something that you really shouldn't have done, you've disgraced, a statue in this case, which was what happened when John was gyrating next to a statue of one of their sacred leaders on this planet. They'll thumb you down if you end up, no, excuse me. If you end up getting over 10 million downvotes, then you're reprogrammed. And that actually happened to two members of the Planetary Union who were down there surveying the planet. And because they couldn't answer the questions in the way that the media there wanted them to answer, and the people wanted them to answer where it was believable, they were downvoted and they were reprogrammed. And what ends up happening is the two of them are taken into the room where they're going to be reprogrammed. But before the other one gets into the room, he breaks free of the guards and starts running, and he's shot and killed. But basically, what this episode was, about was the fact that, you've got a society who has only known this one system on, how to go about their daily lives. And it's not until the Orville gets there and the crew starts explaining to them what's going on, as far as the way they're seeing it from a completely different perspective, that one particular member of the society who goes on to the Orville, thanks to Alara, is, opened up to, her eyes are open. And, you can't go by what everyone else is going by. You got to make decisions for yourself, is what I took from this episode. And, you see this girl at the very end of the episode, she's watching the TV and she ends up turning it off instead of doing an upvote or a downvote, making her own decisions. And, that's just like, what goes on social media. People will respond to a post about, any topic that's going on, in all aspects, whether it be entertainment, sports, you know, the economy, politics, and everybody's got their own opinion. And you read some of those comment sections, and some people, they are very respectful of others, other people not so much. But for people to even just see the headline, and you see that some people have thumbed it up, some people have thumbed it down, and you're watching a YouTube video, like you're watching this particular video, you either thumb it up or you thumb it down because there's just something about the video that you don't like. And try to clear that up a little bit. All right. But there's something you don't like about the video, and it could be anything. It could be me. You may not like looking at me. Yeah, it may be something else too. And you thumb it down, and you decide not to share it. And it just basically talks about lead your own way, don't follow the pack. And there's also another episode in the Orville, and it was the season finale, and it's one where Kelly becomes an idol after an away team led by Kelly goes down, and they actually interact with one of the local children who falls and trips and has a nice gash on her forehead. And Kelly manages to heal it. Well, she ends up becoming that culture's god, and they idolize her. And the episode, I've got it written down here. I had to write down some of the episode titles just so I would remember. Let's see. Yeah, it was idolatry or idolatry. I know I'm saying it wrong, but anyways, Kelly is considered an idol, a god. They've written a whole religion around her. There's scriptures saying, Kelly will strike you down if you don't do this. Again, it's another race who takes their religion very seriously, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just showing, different perspectives on everybody's different religious and cultural backgrounds, which, I think is great. And, what ends up happening is, this planet in phase, and it reminded me of a season 3 episode of DS9 where Jadzia falls in love with one of these local civilizations, and actually one of their citizens on this planet that comes into our reality every, I think it was 300 years, 500 years. I don't remember the exact number, but they phase in and out of our reality. So that's pretty much what this episode did too, except there came a point where Isaac actually stayed on the planet, and by the time we see Isaac again, this planet's highly advanced. Their technology is far superior to that of even the Orville. They even have transported systems. They're able to beam people on and off ships. And Isaac uses that opportunity under, instructions from Captain Mercer to set the people straight and set them on a better path. And well, that path was a more technological path. So, that episode to me, it also dealt with, interfering with other cultures, the Prime Directive, non-interference, because you never know what you might end up doing, how it might influence the people, whether your intentions are good or bad. You should You should basically follow a strict guideline and keep, as much of your own personal views out of another culture's views as much as possible because they're not going to see it the way you see it and you're not going to see it the way they see it. So, that's, what that episode was about. And, you know, another episode I did like was Let There Be Stars. And one of the things I liked about that was you had you know, these survivors who were on basically a generation ship. There are people from this world that have lived on the ship for generation upon generation, and all they've ever known is their world inside the ship, which is big one big holodeck. It's a little bit of the plot from Insurrection, which Brandon Braga, who was actually one of the producers on the Orville, co-wrote and had a hand in making. Well, it's kind of that idea of taking a species away from their homeworld. In this case, they were, leaving their homeworld because they had to. And one of the leaders who actually developed the idea and was guiding the ship was this unnamed character played by Liam Neeson. So, you had a guest star who wasn't part of Star Trek, but Seth MacFarlane has enough pull where he can get somebody like Liam Neeson to make a cameo appearance on his show. And even in that episode, they've only known, two sets of living. One set is very basic, very, farm life. The other is very industrial, very city like. And they don't believe until the crew of the Orville actually show them that they're on board a large starship, which is actually headed directly toward a star. And unless they correct their course, their ship and them are going to be destroyed. And, the Orville is able to get to the bridge. The crew of the Orville is able to get to the bridge, I should say, and they're able to, write the course and help the people learn more about themselves. And that's what I like. And you could credit somebody like Brandon Braga for that, being a part of this show, but also being a part of Star Trek: Next Generation, Voyager, Enterprise, and the motion pictures. As far as the Next Generation motion pictures are concerned. So it definitely had its touches with, you know, Star Trek, a Brandon Braga episode, because there was another episode and I saw, the fingerprints of a Brandon Braga script only from watching episodes of, Next Generation and Voyager. And it was the episode called Krill, where we actually get to learn more about the Krill civilization. There, you know, the fact that, you know, they believe so highly in their god Avis, and the Planetary Union knows so little about the Krill as far as their religion's concerned. And, you know, some might say, well, wouldn't they have it downloaded onto a shuttle or onto their ship? P- You know, probably, but you also have to understand, this is a culture that is very faithful to their religion. So why wouldn't they actually have a physical copy of their Bible, the Creole Bible, the Book of Amos? And Ed and Gordon are tasked with infiltrating a Creole ship and getting a copy of the Book of Amos so the Planetary Union scientists can study it and learn more about the Creole culture. And they're able to do that. But of course, there are some hiccups because they start forming attachments to members of the crew. Ed forms an attachment to the school teacher that's on there. And what ends up happening when Gordon and Ed are discovered, they end up using high density light, bright lights to do I want to put it this way? Okay. They end up they end up killing the crew that are on the bridge, except for the school teacher and the students who Ed and Gordon do form an attachment to. And of course, they are discovered in this episode. And also in this episode, you had Kelly Hu playing a dad role. And Kelly Hu has been around for years. She's been part of Charlie's Angels, the first Charlie Angels movie. I believe she was part of Nash Bridges, or no, I think that was her. And also, she was in the movie Chicago, which was based on the musical. She's been all over as far as the entertainment world is concerned when it comes to movies and television shows. But you know, Ed and Gordon are able to get what they need as far as Union intelligence is concerned. They're able to save some of the crew on board the ship who weren't killed, because this crew vessel was on a course to eradicate a species because they weren't believing in the Book of Amos or the religious beliefs of the crew themselves. So, again, you know, there are episodes of the Orville that, touch on political views a little bit, because it's, the political views of the crew led by their religious views, and then you have the views of the planetary union and the many species that inhabit the planetary union aside from humans, because you have the Mocklins and their traditions, their beliefs, and you have the Kalons, their beliefs. They believe they're superior to everyone else. And you also have the beliefs of the Soleans, who don't really look fondly on those who are in the military. They frown upon it because they're more into the cultural arts and the mind. And speaking of Soleans, there are actually two Soleans who are Alara's mother and father. One is an emergency medical hologram from Voyager, Robert Picardo, and the other is Molly Heron, who was actually the first Vorta we ever met on Deep Space Nine in the episode Jem'Hadar. Her character was Loris, and she's Alara's mother, for anyone who didn't know that. So you have the first sentient EMH who was actually allowed to expand on his programming, and you had the first member of the Dominion other than a Jem'Hadar that we meet, in being the first Vorta that we ever meet. So that to me, it was cool to see those two actors in the same scene together. And you're so used after watching the Wonder Years and seeing Robert Ricardo play the coach on the Wonder Years, and then he's the EMH on Voyager, and of course he was also the taxi driver in The Last Action Hero with Arnold Schwarzenegger. So to see some familiar character actors, and you know there was the actor who played Dr. Bashir's father. He was in Open Moons, and he was also in Austin Powers. But to see familiar character actors who you've seen on other movies and TV shows, it's pretty cool. And as far as dislikes with the series, well, there's not really too many dislikes for me when it comes to the Orville. And the reason for that is because I fully understand that this is Seth MacFarlane laying the foundation for his Star Trek type series. Now, some will argue that if you're going to be paying an homage to Star Trek, that you do it respectfully, and he does, but he also adds the comedic twist to it, and you wouldn't expect anything else from Seth MacFarlane. I mean, if you watch Family Guy, he, you know, being a comedy show, he'll interject comedy into it all the time. And yeah, some of the comedy, it's juvenile. It's something we would say as teenagers, but some of it actually does work, and it actually does give you a chuckle. So I can live with that. And of course, there are going to be people who have watched episodes of Pacific 414 episode review where I've talked about Star Trek Discovery and how it doesn't feel like Star Trek, and it really doesn't. And when they tried in season 2 to add their own comedic character called Linus, who was basically a ripoff of Orville's Dan, which is played by Mike Henry, who's the voice of Cleveland. At least he was the voice of Cleveland until recent events. And to rip off the Orville, or as some might just be saying, like I've said before, pay homage, give a compliment to the Orville and create their own character. And I'm sorry, Linus doesn't come off like Dan does from the Orville, because Star Trek to me has always been sci-fi drama based, dealing with current events and current issues, and it is very progressive, as is the Orville, when they know how to get serious, and they do. But when you have people who know how to give that comedic timing, and you've got the same crew that works on Family Guy, the Cleveland Show, American Dad, and a few other Seth MacFarlane projects, when you have those same people writing for the Orville who are used to writing comedy, and this is a Star Trek like setting, a science fiction setting, leave it to them, because they're the ones who know how to do it. And I know it's always been a stickler for people who have watched Star Trek and saying, well, in the military you want to do this, in the military you want to do that, and that's well warranted, because there are even things in this series that you say, well, the military would really frown upon that, like when John was gyrating next to the statue, and you know not not knowing, of course, about that culture and what the statue represented to that culture, but going down there and gyrating, that would have been a major stickler. You don't go to a foreign country and disrespect that foreign country unless you're ready to face the consequences. So, I understand that. I mean, there's even, an argument at one point with Next Generation of how quickly Geordi got promoted. I remember reading in Star Trek Next Generation magazine, and somebody had said that, being a former military personnel themselves, that for as quickly as Geordi got promoted from season 1 to season 2, that wouldn't have happened in the actual military. But, you also have to take into account that this is a TV series, and what we don't see on TV, are things that happen off screen, so it moves kind of fast. And, even though, in season two, and I'll get more in depth in season two when I do my whole review of season two, which will probably come Sunday. And even though in season two the Orville gets a little bit more serious, I do like the fact that, much to my surprise, much, to my amazement, the comedy for the most part in this series works. And, the drama in this series works. I mean, Priya, the episode with Charlize Theron, where she is playing a human from the 29th century, and it just reminded me of an episode of Next Generation where they had a character who came from the 25th century, and he was actually from the 22nd century after all was said and done. But anyways, Priya came back because at one point in an alternate timeline, the Orville was supposedly destroyed. Well, because she was able to get them through this particular area of spatial gas, well, the Orville survived and history was changed. Of course, Priya wanted to bring the crew of the Orville and the Orville itself back to the 29th century as a trophy, as a museum piece. And of course, that didn't happen. And Charlize Theron was very good in that episode. And, again, I know for anyone who's watched my Discovery reviews, they're probably thinking, okay, so you love the Orville, but you don't love Discovery. Listen, I have tried and tried and tried to give Star Trek Discovery a chance, and I just can't do it anymore. 3 seasons, I'm out. Just like 3 strikes, you're out. So, I've tried. I have tried, and it's just not for me. It's just not for me. No, maybe sometime down the line, I'll watch the series again, and maybe I'll enjoy it for what it is. But it's just not for me. And I can honestly say the reason why I like the Orville so much, and even though I've already mentioned this in the beginning, is because the Orville reminds me so much of the Next Generation era of Star Trek. And even the original series. I mean, you know, to be able to talk about current events and put them within a story frame where they don't pick one side or another side, they leave it somewhat in the middle to allow the audience to decide. I really enjoy that. I, I I really like good storytelling like that because Seth MacFarlane is right, as he says in one of the bonus videos on the Next Generation Blu-rays. You know, you don't need to have an episode where the crew is under constant attack and things are blowing up all around them in every direction possible. What you need is good storytelling and a good story that will get people invested and make them want to come back. I'm not saying you forget about, the action-packed episodes all together. You don't. But to me, you don't always have to, you know, have an episode where it's constant ship battle, it's constant, phaser fights, blaster fights in a corridor, you know, where you have those episodes like about a girl where they're asking themselves the question, do we interfere? Do we interfere with someone's own decisions as far as their sexual orientation? And that's what I like because, there's an episode of Next Generation season 2 where, Starfleet debates whether data is property or not. And that episode's Measure of a Man. And it goes through an arbitration hearing, and Picard is representing Data, and Commander Riker is representing Starfleet, and you've got two opposing sides, and what we see in that episode is that it is determined that Data is not property of Starfleet, but Data is also able to choose his own path. And he's even mentioned that he chose to become a Starfleet officer because it was Starfleet officers who rescued him. So that was that influence. And that's pretty much what About a Girl was talking about. And I know I've already discussed About a Girl, but going back to it, it's pretty much, you know, people need to be allowed to make their own decisions. You may not agree with it, but it's their life. Let them move on, and you should move on. So, again, there's really nothing negative I can say about this series because it just brings a smile to my face for the fact that it reminds me of Star Trek. The music cues you hear, James Horner music cues, Jerry Goldsmith music cues, that sound like the Wrath of Khan or the motion picture Star Trek 5. You had those music cues, even some of the sound effects, and of course, I know that because rewatching the episodes, I've got my headphones on, as you can see, and you hear some of the sound effects, and some of them are the same sound effects that were used on various Star Trek series, including the original series. When the doors open to the simulator, you hear the sound of the doors opening on DS9. I'm not talking about the airlock doors. I'm talking about the doors when they're going into various quarters or cargo bays, or even when communications are open. The communication sound effect is the same sound effect from the original series. And of course, when they're tapping on the control console, some of the same sound effects are those that were used throughout the Next Generation era on board Federation starships. And, even those little attentions to detail are very nice to see. And, that's pretty much what I've got to say about The Orville. The Orville is an excellent show. It's a show that I am looking forward to come season 3. I know season 3 is currently in production, and I have seen pictures on various fan sites and various YouTube videos. Egotastic Fun Time, and JP's latest video, and I don't know him, but he is someone I do watch and I do enjoy his content. So JP, if you ever see this, just want to let you know I enjoy your content. But even in his last video, he showed some behind the scenes pictures that were taken of production of season 3. So season 3 is coming. It's coming later than any of us thought it would because of the pandemic, but it's coming, and I'm looking forward to it. But before we get on to season 3, I need to do my review of season 2, and I'm gonna do it just like I'm doing this one. It's gonna be live on Sunday. I'll start it at 5:30. 5:30 Sunday is when I'll do my season 2 review of the Orville, and you know look forward to hearing what I have to say about season 2, as especially certain key episodes. And I think episodes that I'm going to be talking about without even mentioning them here. But there are certain episodes where you go, this show has found its footing. Let's keep it going. So I want to thank anyone who stopped by and listened to me talk on and on about the Orville season 1. I really appreciate it. I had tried to, put a video together with some clips and some narration, and it just wasn't working right. So I thought, you know what? I do this for all my other episode reviews. So I'm going to go live, and whether it be for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, I'm just going to talk about the Orville. Even if I, skip things about season one, I'm just going to talk about the Orville and what I like about it, because I like it more than I dislike it, if that makes any sense. This is a great show. Seth MacFarlane, Brandon Braga, Joe Minowski, John Favreau, Cherry. I don't want to butcher her name, so I'll just call her Cherry. But, you know, she's one of the producers on Family Guy. And again, I don't even want to try to butcher her last name, because that's exactly what I'm going to do. But I'll say her first name since I can say that easily. But, it's just a well done show. The cast, the crew, they all do a tremendous job on this show. And for a show that was inspired by Star Trek, it certainly, you know, making its own path, going its own direction as far as becoming its own series. And that's what I really appreciate about it. And, I look forward to telling you what I enjoy about season two come Sunday, because tomorrow I will be going on at 4:30 Eastern Time, 4:30 in the afternoon, with my review of episode 2 of The Falcon and Winter Soldier. Now, depending on, you know, episode 2, I may continue on with my episode reviews of The Falcon and Winter Soldier. I may not. I know I got some feedback on my last one, and some people were mad that I didn't point out moments that, were woke. Well, you know what? Those moments didn't bother me. Okay. If they bothered me to, a point where I felt I needed to mention them, then I would have mentioned them. But those moments, and, I saw them. They didn't bother me, because, I'm trying to give this series a chance. And that's all anyone can ask. Even with a subscription that it's not ending till November, I'm going to try to give this series a chance. I'm going to try to give Loki a chance. And, for me, I've said this before, when it comes to a series, usually it takes 3 episodes. If you don't believe me, I posted a first impressions video of Cobra Kai. And, I say in that video, and I'm going to go ahead and say it now, that it usually takes me 3 episodes of a brand new series to know whether I like it or not. The exception, and you can find that in my episode 1 review of The Mandalorian. The exception is The Mandalorian, and episode 1 got me hooked right away. But as far as Falcon and Winter Soldier, I'll know more after watching it tomorrow whether I'm going to continue to watch it. But definitely, if it's not after tomorrow's second episode, then, next Friday's third episode, I'll definitely know, whether I'm going to continue on with the series or not. Because one thing that was, and I know this is getting off topic, and I'm going to go ahead and say it, but one thing that was disappointing to me about WandaVision was, the way it ended. Because I think they could have done a great job with the series had they had it where Monica Rambeau, you know, went into the Westview anomaly at the beginning of the series in episode 1. And then from there, we got, the different settings as far as the different sitcoms we were supposed to be in. And, during those episodes, we, you know, got intermixed with, Wanda having flashbacks, but that's just me. So, all in all, I give The Orville a 5 out of 5. It's a great series, no complaints. Really enjoy it. Seth MacFarlane's doing a great job with this series, and I really hope that it goes beyond the third season. But before we get to the third season, once again, just a little reminder, I'm going to be doing my third season review on Sunday, and I look forward to it. And I hope you look forward to it. And I will see you 5:30 Eastern on Sunday for my season 2 review of The Orville. So until then, until tomorrow, I will see you all later. And I hope you all have a great evening and take care. Appreciate you all. One more look at Seth MacFarlane when it was on Star Trek Enterprise, and now I bid you adieu for this day.